Elizabeth, it's
Hello.
pleasure to have you in here today, and I'm
Lovely to
really
meet
looking
you.
forward discovering a little bit more about you and your stories.
Yeah,
Please
thank you
tell
so
us.
much for inviting me today.
You're most welcome.
I'm actually honoured.
Please introduce yourself to our listeners.
So, my name's Elizabeth Higgs. I'm known as Lizzie. I work as a business development manager for Dwellant. So, I've worked in PropTech for 2 years, and prior to that, I was a property manager. So, my role has changed a lot, and now it's really about being able to problem solve for managing agents or buildings, sometimes self managed buildings, and provide tech solutions that can help people to manage their buildings more transparently, more efficiently, to automate, allow them to have better insights on their buildings, enhance communication. Um, yeah, and sometimes I still get to attend residents meetings. But as
Oh, wow.
the prop tech visitor, sounds very sexy.
Indeed. How did you get in property management and when?
So I originally started out as a temp PA for a large managing agent in Birmingham city centre. So I had no experience whatsoever.
Mm.
I didn't even know what a lease was. And I remember my first day in property management, that like the day before, I just left my old job because they told me I couldn't have holiday between like May and October. And I was like, excuse me. So I left that job. I went straight to city centre, spoke with a recruiter, and I said, I'm looking
Mm.
for personal assistant roles. And the next day she
Okay.
called me, and I remember I was lying on the sunbed. I got this call, and she was like, there's a PA job in city centre, but it's a property assistant and you have to be there in 1 hour. So I got off the sunbed, went home, showered, got
Okay.
dressed, got a bus into town. I basically had no context whatsoever, so I assumed it would actually be a lettings role. And I walked into the office, had a
Yeah.
little bit of an introduction, but sat down. It's basically just answering the phones. And the guy sat next to me at the front, Brad, who's actually a good friend now. I remember answering the phone, turning to him and being like, what is the company name? I literally didn't even know the company name. I thought he was the manager for like 3 days because he was sat where the manager sits and they were off. And
Hilarious.
like other temps would come in and they would just like cry and leave because obviously they weren't used to the job. They didn't know what they were getting
Mm.
themselves into.
Yeah.
And it was absolute chaos. But I really wanted a job. And I remember putting through calls like, oh, the fire brigade are on the phone. Like I was completely clueless. I was just a girl. Um, but
Oh, I
that
can
job,
relate to that. Yeah,
so
very much.
that job was where I learned that I loved helping people. And I found a lot of confidence in myself because before
Mm.
that I'd done arts and a photography degree. And when I
Okay.
left university, I'd really struggled to find a creative job. I did like a couple of
Mm.
freelance jobs myself, but I didn't really have like any direction. So I found myself in like menial jobs, like 8-hour contracts. I had a job for a while as like a out of warranty repairs for a
Okay,
sofa
yeah. Mhm.
manufacturer. But I just had like no self confidence. And I think I was a bit like drained and fragile from a few
Mhm.
years of trying to just get somewhere and not really knowing what to do and not having any direction. So this was a bit of a turning point for me where things started to fall together. And I remember in that
Okay.
job, the head of residential at the time, she asked me, do you like this job? And I was like, yeah, it's the best job I've ever had. And she
Yeah.
was like, what do you like about it? And I was like, well, I get to help people with their problems.
Yes.
And they're not my problems and, they become my problems, but I get to help them with their
Mm.
issues that they're experiencing. And it kind of removes me from my life and my problems every day. And I think that kind of I shaped it into my why. And,
Mm.
this is why I'm doing what I'm doing at the moment. Um, yeah, and I worked there for almost 2 years. But I moved into another PA role, was promoted to a PM within like 6 months in my next role at Centric, and the rest is kind of history. And I worked as a PM with a number of different types of portfolios. I always kind of preferred smaller portfolios with large freehold blocks. So that was kind of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
But I also enjoyed working closely with like RMCs because you
Mm.
can form those like close, positive working
True.
relationships.
Yeah.
And I think, that advisory position is quite nice to have. You walk in and directors teach you about their buildings, but then you teach them the best way to then manage them. And I think it's just a really
Correct.
nice thing to have. Um,
Correct.
so yeah, I also had roles as a roaming development manager, well, at one point like a hybrid role with a
Mhm.
PM role, and also as a development manager as my main role. And I think those positions gave me a better like practical technical knowledge
Mhm.
of the assets on site, different fire alarm systems, door systems, how to undertake testing. And I think I ended up with a broader working knowledge of the way that buildings work because I would meet with contractors. They'd show me
Mhm.
how things worked. It was like, this is how to test this, this is what to look for. I was once shown how to survey internal wall insulation. He actually let me drill him, not drill him, oh my God, let me help him drill the wall. Which is, I mean, arguably unwise to let me touch a drill.
Yeah. But probably he found it safe anyway, so otherwise it wouldn't have.
Yeah, he wouldn't have let me
But
otherwise.
I so agree of like going to sites and meeting contractors and obviously following them and looking at what they're doing and asking them questions about fire alarms or AOVs or anything, or even drilling a hole on the wall. So it is definitely something that has helped me as a
Mm.
property manager.
And I
And
think at first you have like my primary interest in the job was building relationships and helping people. But then once I'd been on site a bit more, I kind of gained
mm,
a keen interest in learning about my buildings and gaining more practical and technical knowledge because, it's really beneficial, and building on site relationships with the people on the tools teaches
yeah.
you a lot of valuable information and kind of
Mm.
makes you more inquisitive and makes you want to learn more.
I definitely feel that nowadays we are a bit more involved with directors than I would say pre-COVID time.
Yeah,
And that's my opinion. And very much like you, we don't manage big estates, but I have managed big estates, and I know how difficult that can be with bigger blocks. But I know also speaking to some other of the guests is, the technology now is helping us manage these buildings way more efficient. So,
it
w-
is. Yeah, I think tech is massively important. The reason that I moved into tech is because it helped me to do my job,
mm,
and especially with large buildings, you can put all that information on a portal. You can allow
yeah,
people to self-serve, but it doesn't have to just be pushing people to self-serve.
mm,
I think some people think, oh, it'll take the heart away from the job if you're just pushing people into tech, but
yeah,
actually you can use it to support what you've got to say. You can be on the phone to somebody and say, actually, I'm going to post something about what we're talking about because, I think there's a knowledge gap.
yeah, yeah.
So I think yeah, tech is extremely important. And that's why I moved into this area of things.
Yeah, you seem to be enjoying it, and you're working with great team. So,
Yes, exactly.
because I know some of them, um, and how because you said at the beginning that you're kind of involved with RMCs and you kind of attend and meetings and you have self-managed properties. What kind of difference do you see back when you were property manager dealing with that, and now obviously, um, do you think is changing to where we obviously want and leading to people using platforms such Dwellant and any other platforms in most efficient way? Because actually, I'm asking you because this morning I
Mm.
went for tender, and it's a pretty large building, but they're so not interested in any of the softwares and leasehold portals that we have, and softwares we're using. But it really surprised me.
Some people are very set in ways and they want to see the traditional, that traditional property manager role. They want to see
Yeah.
people work hard, I suppose.
Mm.
Then they think it's like cheating the system. So I think one of the biggest things that we talk about is obviously encouraging people onto tech, because even, you'll have contractors who don't want to use
Yeah.
the contractor side of the portal. You'll have,
Mm.
older residents who just don't want to use it. They want to stick to paper. And you can't win with everybody, but you
Yeah.
can encourage them to use things. And as I've said, like, I sometimes am part of these meetings and
Mhm.
they actually go, oh, that actually is really good. But I think some of them may have been quite tech resistant before they've,
Yeah.
seen how it works and how easy
Mhm.
it is to use. And we do a lot, looking at, even things like icons. So like an icon on the portal,
Yeah.
say like the three lines for the menu, that you don't realize because you're used to using it all the time, but actually, why would you know that's a menu? So it's
Mhm.
adjusting text so that people understand and can use it more easily.
Yeah.
It's more accessible.
Absolutely. And what type of buildings did you manage back in the days?
So I'd say like a range of different types of buildings. I've had portfolios where, it's a larger portfolio, between like 30 and like over 50 blocks,
Mhm.
where mixed kind of smaller schemes, but obviously some still high rise. And then, more high rise buildings with cladding issues, external
Mm.
wall issues.
Yeah.
Um, so a mixture, and I've had very much a mixture of, larger portfolios with small units and l- smaller portfolios with, which I like because you've got that focus on the schemes. They might be
Mm.
larger schemes, but actually, I just think it gives you more time to put into each building, which is important.
Yeah. And you don't miss going to inspections and, viewing your
No, I do.
building?
I miss lots of things. I actually miss property management so much. But I mean, logically for me, I mean, the money is better in tech. I will put that out there. And I
I
used to
think we
speak
know that.
to used to speak to leaseholders and residents all the time, and they would be like, "Oh, I
Mm.
assume you own your own home," and I'm like, no, because I can't afford
You
to.
definitely
Yeah,
in tech, you definitely don't get all these sorry leaseholders, but emails that are kind of, bullying property managers. They're lovely people also out there, but sometimes it's really hard. Some
you
days are very
don't
hard.
have the same level of abuse, I think, that property
Okay.
managers receive, at all. Our customer service teams get obviously people, very confused people who are like, "There's an issue with the swimming pool," and they're like, "We're literally the tech provider.
Uh,
Really sorry."
okay.
But yeah, it's a completely different kettle of fish. In I genuinely, when I started working in tech, was like, I think I might have retired, because I was like, and I was like, oh, this is great for a little bit, and then I was like, I need more to do. And that's what led me to doing things like working with the TPI and having kind of extracurricular commitments,
Mm.
because it puts my head into a different space, and gives me some more things to think about,
Mm.
because I was just so used to being busy. Once you've done such a varied, busy role
Role,
that is
yeah.
so fast paced, you are almost like addicted to it.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you leave that kind of
No,
role,
just
you're like,
give me
oh,
goosebumps, like, thinking about because it actually is quite, an amazing role,
it
so
is. It is. And I think there are so many things about that role to enjoy. Even though it's busy, and also like teams in property management, the people that you work with, you become so close to them,
mm,
because you are all in the same boat and you're all dealing with loads of stress. But like we used to call it the trauma bond. Um, and you are so close to everybody you work with, and actually a lot of the things that you deal with, you just learn to laugh. Obviously, you have the days where people
yeah,
cry,
yeah.
and you're like, okay, we'll go
They're
outside.
amazing people, and
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of posts from, colleagues and, people in the industry where they post like a little card or a little gift that they received from a
Mm,
leaseholder just saying thank you. And we recently had a couple of emails from a new client that we've taken this year. The properties came with a lot of outstanding issues, and and we've been obviously busy tackling those. And just a nice thank you email, it just goes a long way.
It can
Sure.
be it can be such a rewarding job, and I think when things go right or when you just meet the right people, some people are absolutely lovely and they
Yeah.
will really appreciate just seeing that you've put the time into their block and into speaking to them and meeting with them.
Yeah.
So that's the best part about the job, the human connection.
Absolutely. And just going back to buildings, we will touch up on TPI and Dwellant, I'm sure, again. Um, in terms of, communication with leaseholders and situations that you must have come across in your time as a property manager, tell me a story of anything that come in mind, and maybe you thought of a couple of stories that you're like, oh, I have forgotten about it, or maybe you never forget about it.
I think I'll probably share a story about that a really like challenging, frustrating scheme actually. Because there's lots of nice little things. There's so many nice little leaseholders that I used to meet, and they'd be so appreciative of what I was doing. But
Mm,
occasionally you get those really frustrating schemes that you work on, and actually they don't end up being rewarding. And everything, like this story I'm going to tell, everything needed doing to this building.
mm,
It didn't actually have that much potential either. It wasn't like some lovely building that could have been, I mean, it could have been better, but it
mm.
wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't it.
What
So I thought I'd
happened?
mention this one because I thought it might resonate. Because sometimes, yeah, sometimes you just don't win. And so many people would probably pick a nice story where you take on a horrible problem and you get to the bottom of it and everything's resolved. But I'm not going to. So this building, I was for some reason determined to get somewhere with this like vile building.
Okay.
And because I was like, I can turn this around. It's going to be rewarding when I do.
Yeah.
Nobody has managed to do it yet, and it will be really satisfying.
Challenging.
Um, yeah, that's it. And it was challenging, and it was frustrating, and it wasn't satisfying at all. So basically, just visiting this building, you could see like a mile off. It needed external repairs. It needed internal redecks, like a full rip out of
Mm,
everything. It like repair holes in the walls, like carpet replacements. I'm
yeah.
not just talking about some painting. And one leaseholder in particular, the most vocal, would just not pay for the most basic services at the block.
Mhm.
And we tried everything to allow us to take it legal.
Yeah.
Payments were constantly on stop, but we had this massive electricity deficit that had built up over years and years.
Okay.
Basically, since day dot, and it was unpaid. We hadn't received any bills, but the scheme was a mess. The landlord supply was connected to the flats, but without sub meters. So some
Okay.
apartments
Yeah.
had new meters put in, and so there was a whole investigation on when those were installed because
Mhm.
it was like, well, we've got this massive bill. We Some apartments have got their own supply, others don't, but we don't know when they had those supplies put in. But this
Okay.
bill, stems back years and years. So how do we bill that out? So obviously, every time we tried to bill out anything, especially this one leaseholder in
They
particular,
dispute.
she would come back and dispute it because
Yeah.
she was like, "Well, no, I don't have to pay this because actually, no, I don't think I'm liable for this." And we were like, "Well,
Yeah.
you know that we can't apportion it out correctly. Thank you, thank you."
So how
Um,
come how come the supplier could not give a date of when the meters were installed?
So it was because the apartments had had their own new meters put in.
Mhm.
They had had those put in individually at different dates. So obviously we went through a whole process of speaking to people, getting proof of when those were put
Yeah.
into the building.
Yeah.
But based on the figure that they'd sent us, it would
Mhm.
have taken like an excessive amount of years to accumulate. Based on the current accumulative usage, it would
Yes.
have taken years and years, and we were like, this doesn't add up either, and we didn't have a complete set of bills. So it was, yeah,
Mm.
it was horrendous to try and like pick it apart,
Yeah.
so that you could get to the answer. And we spent a lot of time just ripping things apart and trying to get like concrete information
Yeah.
to work with, um, alongside getting in figures for, works and projects you knew that basically weren't going to happen,
Mm.
at least not anytime soon.
Yeah.
And trying to prioritize health and safety. It was like throwing your time into a
Yeah.
hole. I'm sure you
I
go
can
bald just
imagine.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, we tried to build better relationships with the most vocal leaseholder, put a lot of time into that, but that was a battle. It
Mm.
was difficult. They wanted to go RTM, so they wanted everything in writing. You would initiate a conversation about meeting or speaking on
Yeah.
the phone, but the opportunity to build a good relationship just was blocked essentially. So emails were at some point maybe a bit more pleasant in tone. I think that's the best
Mm.
we got out of it, but you just couldn't get anywhere. So it was working with other leaseholders to try and get the answers that you needed to somewhat give yourself a basis to try and to start to rectify that
Yeah.
situation, because it had
Yeah.
gone on for so long. It'd been through so many property managers. Um, and when I left the business, it was still in the same state, um,
Gosh.
with some more investigatory
Do
kind
you
of
think it's
notes on.
resolved now?
I don't know. So I'm often interested in where a building ended up afterwards,
Mm.
and I'm like, what's actually going on with that building now? And it had been through, so
Yeah.
many property managers who had obviously tried to put in their time, and it fell for them. And the handover would be like, this
Yeah.
building.
I
Um,
totally hear you. And I think with my first job, I had something similar, like few cases going on, and I was trying to resolve them because they were not resolved before me and before the other PM and so on. And they were just dragging for years. And all I was trying is to do my job, but like similar to you, challenging, rewarding, because you will finish the job, right?
That's it. And I think I was determined that I would turn it around. And what
Mm,
I learned from it was that sometimes you just don't win. But don't be
no.
discouraged. Sometimes you just don't win. It's not you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the thing with me, is because I'm like, I kept staying in the company because I was like, okay, let me just finish on this project. Let me just finish on this project.
Yeah.
And it just went for like years. And at some point, and I was also a little bit bullied there by my director. And at some point I was like, I need to finish this for my leaseholders, not for
Mm,
him. But yeah, it's just something that you just have to come in terms
that's
with
it.
and just say, I'm
You want to do
leaving.
the right thing, but sometimes you have to move on.
Yeah. I mean, well, so now we don't know if that got resolved or not.
We don't, but we hope so. Um,
We hope so. But talking about electricity and meters, I've known this building that we currently also manage for about 10 years. And it took about 4 years to get a meter, a landlord meter. They do have a meter. It's running. You can see it, ticking, but not registered. And it took about 4 years to get a supplier to come in and it's registered just
Well,
now.
it takes the time just to get people involved, just to get the right person involved who actually is interested in what you're dealing with and the problem.
Yeah.
Because so many times people will just look at something and go, or somebody will attend and they'll kind of go, "Yeah, we need to do this," but it never happens. Yeah,
There's so many scenarios and situations that we've come across. And I don't think they will ever stop, right? It's something that we can talk about every
it's
week on the
always going
call.
to exist unless you
Yeah,
became a specialist and just went
yeah.
around to buildings going, "You
Mm.
got any problems with your electricity?"
Well, not
Yeah.
just electricity. There's just
But
so many.
everything else, just everything that you have to unravel. And I think I always loved managing. Like if I got a new shiny like freehold scheme that I
Mhm.
had, like, I would be so like, I'd be like, this one's got a manual. It's got some O&Ms.
Yeah,
It's not in a horrible mess that I've got to unpick, which can be great as a challenge, but
yeah.
also it takes up so much of your time. And actually, sometimes it's nice to manage something that it just is a clean slate. Yeah, you'll have defects, there'll be problems, but
Yeah.
It's not unpicking like years and years of you have no idea what's gone on
I
there.
think
Yeah.
self-managed are a bit of a challenge, self-managed properties, because as much as they're like it could be the case, oh, we've done everything and there is nothing for you to do. It's a very easy management. And then the moment you take on, and I'm not talking about the compliance, it's just there's so many other things that are so not, and also I find leaseholders feel like, okay, there is someone that we can go to now,
Mm.
and there is like the bombarding of emails and
We
calls.
have a lot of self-managed buildings obviously speak with us,
Okay.
and property managers will start there. So they'll have a new property manager, a
Mm-hmm.
new development manager.
Yeah.
They'll come to us, they'll speak to us, and they'll try and get things moving. But I've found there's just a really high turnover of staff, especially if it's like one property manager, one development
Yeah.
manager working with, the directors and the leaseholders there. I mean, that must be quite an isolating role as well if you were to do that, you know.
Mm.
And I think it's difficult because people take the role thinking, yeah, I want a challenge, but they realise that actually
Mm.
there's so many problems that just also aren't being acknowledged. So their battle is actually to, to make the leaseholders, to make the directors realise that there are issues there that they need to
Yeah.
deal with, but they
Yeah.
just don't see that they are a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is mainly between leaseholders. In that's my that is that's my observation over the years. It's not so much whether the property is compliant and works need to be done, but it's always because there were two people at least that, have bad relationship, and it just the whole management and everything else around it is also bad, and it's very difficult to.
People wind each other up and it becomes toxic, and then they wind everybody else up, and you spend a lot of your time just saying actually that's not the case. But
Yeah.
it's difficult to re-educate when people don't want to be re-educated. They're, you know set in what they
Yeah.
think.
And but as property managers, we're in the middle, so it's a little. It's kind of like it stops your work somewhere, and we currently have this building, beautiful building, beautiful people, but they just don't get on. It's a small building, and yeah, just being on the call with 5 leaseholders and 3 solicitors representing different parties,
It's not a nice situation to be in, and I think,
no.
um, because as the property manager, you are always the middleman, or the middle woman,
Yeah.
um, because that's your job. Your job is to just constantly take everyone's problems and perspectives and what
Yeah.
they think and what they think is wrong, and basically, come to a resolution. But
Mm.
how do you do that when everyone's, you know,
And
essentially just
the job is very unpredictable, isn't it? It's just every day you like you sit in the morning and you just don't know what's going to come in.
that's
Right?
it. When I was in property management, I remember thinking, like, I watched a video um, on how you kind of prioritize things. It was like an influencer video, and she was making her like matcha super duper smoothie latte, and she sits for like 1 hour first thing and like lists her non-negotiables. And I was just laughing at it because I was like, you can sit and write a list of non-negotiables all you want in property management, but during that task, you'll probably receive several more non-negotiables,
Yeah.
um, and then you might receive something that blows your entire day up. And by the end of the day, you're speaking to people about like alternative accommodations. So at the start of your day, your priority was to just call a director and catch up,
Yeah.
and by the end, it's like rehoming somebody. So the whole time, I think you're constantly, receiving reactive jobs and updates and calls from residents that take much longer than you hope they would. So it's like a minefield,
Mm.
and it's like hitting constant like targets that are constantly moving and running out of time. Um, and yeah, not having worked as a property manager for like 2 years, I think it's actually all of the momentum of those things that
Mm.
gets you through each day. Um, because without that, like, it's all these things that are constantly going on, and it actually pushes you through the day and you just carry on. And I don't think people realize how, now if you gave me that many tasks, I'm like, would I actually be able to deal with it? Or
Yeah.
would I, because there's so much to do, so you just
Mm.
get into the flow? Yeah.
I'm looking forward speaking to some of the recruiters as well, and just going through that, because as you mentioned earlier, a lot of property managers are leaving the industry and either going into recruitment or um, softwares, and training and anything else that is not property management role and not involving hundreds of leaseholders on daily basis, and listening to
Well, that's it. And
the
it's
beef
not
they have
all,
with their neighbor.
yeah, I think it's not all to do with how busy it is. Some people want to slow down. Some people don't want to
Yeah.
slow down particularly, or do something different. They actually go into those roles because they're still connected to the industry.
Mm.
But I do think that nobody wants to talk about it, but salaries are sometimes very low for property managers,
Yeah.
especially when they're not brand new into the industry. They've been working there a bit and they get stuck at a certain salary level. And I
Mm.
think it's discouraging to them, because you actually look at the amount of responsibility that you have
Yeah.
and you go, how does that weigh up,
Well, I hope the stories we tell and obviously the discussions we have here will help, especially the newcomers, because they will at least have an idea of what they're getting themselves in. I certainly, and I believe you, from what you told me earlier, is like we didn't know. We didn't know
No.
what we were getting
You have no
into.
idea. You just go into a job and you go, actually, this is quite exciting. And then years pass and you're like, actually, I've done all these exciting things, and you're really caught up in it. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing. Like, a lot of people say you get the bug for working in the industry, and I think you do.
Mm.
Um,
You
yeah,
you mentioned earlier something about rehousing or looking for alternative accommodation. Was it
accommodation.
because there was something in the blog that happened?
Yeah, but I've had certain things happen. Like, I think that specific one the first one I can think of was like a small block. Again, it was a block that the handover wasn't very good.
Mm.
So when it came through to us as a managing agent, things hadn't been set up properly. People didn't want to pay. There were lots of
Yeah.
disputes. And I remember being sat there I mean, this also works into like prioritizing your tasks in the day, because I remember being sat there and thinking, I've got a really quiet Friday,
Yeah.
and I'm going to do all these things I need to do. And this lady um, rings me and she's like, "Oh, there's a leak in my flat, and it
Oh,
started to get really bad." And I was like, "Okay, right, where is it coming from?" That kind of thing. And
yeah.
it turned out there was an issue with the stack, and it flooded out her apartment in the end. And
We
yeah,
backed up into her flat.
yeah. So by the end, it was just before the weekend,
Oh,
and
lovely.
obviously, like through the day, it just got worse and worse. And I remember just thinking, like, it just went from like me having a very chill day, like being like, I was trying to get some property management.
Friday's
um,
gone. Yeah.
but like, and then it was like, oh, it's gotten worse. Oh, do you have any updates on the contractor coming? Because there's no money either. So I'm trying to get somebody to go out and look at
Yeah.
it, but there's no
Yeah.
money. I know that we're probably, not going to be able to pay for it, but it's an emergency. So I wouldn't send somebody out without telling them the
There was
financial
no money in the
situation.
account, in the block
Yeah, so there's
account.
no money to pay for anything. So I had to get somebody who was happy to go out on delayed payment terms. Um,
So why wouldn't we ask the leaseholder to pay for it and kind of lend the money to the building? Because that is not for our contractors to.
See, this is the thing though. We put it onto contractors,
Yeah, I mean, we
but
shouldn't.
leaseholders would be absolutely dismayed if you asked them and said, actually, you need to pay for this. They're outraged. Like, no, you need to do it because it's the stack. And you're like, yes, but that ultimately they haven't paid.
Yeah,
There's an issue with the building. We can't, we're struggling then to get somebody out. Um,
yeah.
and yeah, it's just an absolute, minefield again of
So the
different
contractor
issues.
agrees. So the contractor agrees to receive payment at later stage,
That's it.
and then he goes.
Then they go out. I think they started investigating, and it was a bigger issue. I can't remember the exact details. It's
Mm.
been years since this happened, but they started investigating. It was something to do with a tree root. Just it just got more and more complicated. So then I had to get somebody else out to look at it
Yeah.
because it
So
was to
so
do with the tree.
definitely clean your drains and gutters and make sure leaseholders that you have agreed on any funds that are that are
This is
built
it.
yeah,
The
for maintenance.
expectation is so high, and when people won't pay, it's so frustrating because I get that they have a dispute, but then you think, well, you may have a dispute, but now
Yeah.
you've got a tree that's been growing into into the drainage system, and it's messed everything up.
Yeah. Well, it could be we've had an issue in a building we took over. Um It was just repaired, but it was basically a bird's nest went into the hopper and then um blocked it, and
Yeah.
it was seeping through every time it rained. It was kind of going because it was a top floor flat, so it's been going into the flat, and at some point the ceiling just collapsed, and you just got
Oh,
like that's what the leaseholder was telling me. He had tenants at the time, and he's like, they just told me that overnight they kind of got that patch,
yeah,
and
and they're
they
like, "Oh, there's a
reported
patch
it.
there." Yeah.
Yeah, and they reported it to the managing agent, and whilst reporting it, and obviously the managing agent not knowing, is it the roof, is it the terrace, because there was also a terrace on kind of
Mm.
the masonette top level, because it was just a funny layout, that building. And then obviously the hopper is quite high, so it's not like you can get someone.
Nobody's gonna know. That's the thing,
No.
is it? Nobody knows that these things are going on unless you've
Yeah.
got a drone and you're constantly flying around the building
Well,
saying what's
drones are
going on.
now, but back then there were not that many drones, and
Yeah,
it's
people
also.
didn't
Yeah,
do
and it's
that.
also, I think leaseholders sometimes do not understand the investigation work that needs to go into, because
No.
if you don't, then how would you know? And sometimes, and obviously nowadays it's more like we'll need to send the drones because it's the
Mm.
quickest and easiest way and the cheapest way, rather than getting the scaffolding or tower. But yeah, that's what
There's
happens.
so much pressure, isn't there, to get it right, and you send somebody out, and they need to investigate, and people
Mm,
are like, they're like, "Why isn't it repaired yet?" And you're like, "Well,
yeah,
obviously, because if we as soon as we use your money to, pay for this repair, and
yeah.
it's the wrong repair, and we've wasted the money, you're gonna be annoyed as well.
Yeah, because
So how
you're
do we win?"
rushing. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
under pressure. It's got to
mm,
be done now.
that's it.
But yeah, it's so many stories like this that, especially I find it with self-managed properties that we have taken in the past a few years, where there is simply no funds to do anything. And when something comes in, you what do you do? You're kind of stuck. And you try for every time the budget is due, and you just said
You just get the same
for 100.
disputes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, we keep it to minimum. We keep it to minimum. And as much as I understand that their financial impact to some leaseholders, there must be the agreement, which I've tried at the time to set, is like, I want you all to agree on email that if anything happens and we need £2,000, let's say, for whatever works that it might come, we need to make sure that we can send the contractors, because what you've done
What
is great because
an
the
emergency.
contractor was
Yeah.
happy to attend, but what if they are not? And I wouldn't blame a contractor that rejects that.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, do you? It's just you actually end up quite lucky to have people who
Yeah.
will attend, even though you've told them that information. Um, so yeah,
We
I think
yeah. We
we don't take that for granted as property
no.
managers.
So
Like,
we recently had a situation where um they, similar to what I just said earlier, they had no funds to pay the building insurance. So one of the leaseholders had to pay, and now they basically lended the money to the company. But
it's just
but after
insane,
a
isn't
lot
it?
of a lot of negotiation, then someone had to pay it, because we basically said, well, we'll cancel. The insurer is looking for their money. The broker is threatening that they'll cancel the policy.
When nobody pays, you just end up with this. It's just a catch-22 situation where nobody
Mm,
wins. Like you can't help them as the managing agent. They don't get any help when there's an issue. And you can't prioritize important things like the building's insurance.
yeah, but
And
the
we don't, you don't get paid either. Realistically,
mm,
does the managing agent get paid
yeah, well, let's
if
not
you?
let's not
Yeah,
discuss but let's not discuss management fee, because that is a big topic, and what
it
it
is.
covers and what it doesn't cover. Although, you know, there is a management agreement and it does list what it's covered and the additional, but that's another thing. But it's challenging, right? And a lot of the situations we come across are complex as well, and it's not so straightforward. So you give your understanding, opinion, the legislations in place, the lease, most of all, that's what we go with. And
Mm.
it's still not understand from the other side. And it hurts sometimes, because you're trying really to improve the building to make sure that it's in good condition. But yeah,
It
it's,
does, and when you work with, say, an RMC and you realise pretty quickly that their priority is cost and just keeping costs down, it's
yeah,
always so disappointing because as the director of that building, they should, actually they should have they should have a willingness and a
mm,
want for that building to be thriving, to be in
yeah,
that position. But actually, a lot of directors that I've worked with, it ends up that they've gone into that role because they think they can drive costs down so
mm,
it costs less for them and the leaseholders, and that's a good thing.
yeah. And it could be
Um,
personal agenda there as well.
that's it. And they sit in that role. And I had one director and he said, "Yeah, we're not doing these fire safety works." He was like, "It's all a load of crap." And I was like,
Okay.
"Okay." And then I said, "Can you put that in writing?" We'd never put it in writing. It went round and round in circles. It's just a waste of everyone's time. And it's frustrating for you when
Yeah,
you say to somebody, "No, I've got, I'm interested in your building. I'd like
yeah,
you to get past all these health and safety
yeah.
tasks that we need to get through and actually get to, what could we do with the building? What could be improved? What could be better?"
Exactly. Have you
But you
found
can't get to
how
that
many
stage.
exactly, and how many times you've done above and beyond, you've gone your ways to actually do something that it will benefit the building, and it's is that a mistake from our side that
Well, that's it. You produce a budget and you say, you can discuss them as well. You discuss with the director through the whole year. I think we should put this in the budget. This would be a good idea. They're like, "Yeah, that's great." They get the budget, they review it, they send it back to you, and they've taken everything back out. And you're like,
yeah,
"So we're back at stage one then."
yeah. Well,
Last year's budget.
it is
Mm,
actually talking about budgets. We currently have a situation where the budget is we've done the budget for the past couple of years, but they kind of not pay, or pay
mm.
in like a small percent, like small fee
Yeah.
every month, but that doesn't cover anything really. So it's almost like down to zero. And it's like, why are we doing the budget if we're not going to follow it?
Well,
And
that's it. If we're going to allow payment plans as well that stagger the costs through the year, so you don't actually receive all the money until the end of the year when you don't need it to manage the building. Well, you do, but you
mm,
don't need it there. Yeah, what are you supposed to do about that? It's
yeah, what do
frustrating.
you think are the common mistakes? What common mistakes do you see in property managers that property managers make?
I would say one, not asking, like people not asking questions because they think they'll look incompetent. So they just take
Yeah.
actions where they don't know what they're doing instead, and then it makes everything worse. That's the biggest one. People not wanting to look incompetent and just not asking what they need to ask.
Yeah, I hear
And then
you.
also taking something they've applied elsewhere,
Hmm.
so and then applying it to a different scenario where it's not applicable.
Yeah,
So they like stop asking questions because they assume that this was the case here. Maybe they have a lease where they could make improvements.
yeah,
So then they go, "Oh, we can do this here as well because we've got the same kind of issue, but
mhm,
maybe that lease is different." And they just
yeah,
go ahead with something as if it's, God. And you're like, this isn't. You can't apply the same thing everywhere. You have to ask questions. You've got to always refer to the individual lease. It's not yeah, and now you've spent money on improvements to a building that shouldn't be recharged to leaseholders.
Yeah.
Or a big one that I see is not providing a specification to contractors for
Okay.
for services. So like they just go with what the contractor says blind. Sometimes they don't even receive a specification from the
Mhm.
contractor, or they'll receive the specification and they don't look
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah.
And then when people question what's going on, so they go, "Oh, nobody's doing the leaf blowing,"
Mm.
and the grounds maintenance team go, "Yeah, we didn't agree to do that."
Yeah.
And you know, why is nobody providing a spec up front? Why are we
Yeah.
not writing our own spec to say this is what we need for the building?
Yeah.
And then we know what we're getting into with the contractor. We know that everybody's doing the right job.
I do agree with this.
A
Yeah.
lot of issues come from that end of things, and then the contractor's like, "Oh yeah, we can do that if you want," and you're like, "Well, how did it even get to this in the
Yeah.
first place?" It's such a simple thing, but nobody ever seems to provide their own specification for
Mm.
you know cleaning grounds, just basic services.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And that leads to us as property managers going to the block, whether you are meeting the contractor or not. But for cleaning, maybe you don't need to. But if it is to do any works,
yeah,
and you don't understand, as we talked about it earlier, for me, going to buildings and meeting contractors and asking questions is how I probably learned most of what I know.
exactly. So it's difficult because people just they either don't communicate or they don't ask for the right things, and
Mm,
so many issues escalate that don't need to escalate in the
yeah,
job, because of simple things that should have been thought about.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
But I think it also leads to something else. So the communication that we're talking about, I think is for us as property managers to, whether you understand or you're confident or not, I think it's to ask also the leaseholders of, like, when they say, well, oh, let's get a quote for the internal communal area
mm,
and just paint. I know it sounds simple, but actually isn't. There's so many little things. There are doors, there are windows, that door frames, doors. Are they included in the major works, and are they leaseholder responsibility? There's just so many things you need to look into. And if the directors or leaseholders you're speaking to, I'm talking to the property managers that have not come across this, and they will, just ask the questions, you know, and list, these are the specifications that you're talking about that we need to draft, of like, okay, directors, are you agreeing with this list? Yes. And then send to the contractor, and the contractor drafts it. But I always ask, let me know if there is anything that I may have missed, or you think it's beneficial to be done with the works and not
that's it.
after.
Or if you've got any questions, if there's something you're prioritizing that I'm not covering here that you think, because they'll probably come
Yeah,
back and tell you afterwards.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's very much about making it clear that there's an open communication channel between you and everybody else. I
yeah,
think sometimes leaseholders will assume that you are, you're just not going to take their
mm,
perspective into account, and
yeah,
actually you are. So it's just making it clear to everybody that it's open communication. Everyone can just be open and honest about what they want. We
yeah,
might say, "Well, actually, we
exactly.
can't do that," but it's an open floor.
Absolutely. And I think, it, even if you drafted the specification, there will always be something that someone will come back, but at least it's not
Yeah.
like a massive list of, like, oh, I need to
Well, that's it. And I just think
retender,
people
you know.
don't check specifications enough. They don't check what's on there. Just simple things. Like I remember having a specification and looking at it, and I was like, "What on earth is
Yeah,
this?" It was like a standard spec. I looked at
yeah.
it. The contractor had supplied it, and it said they did like everything in this spec. And I was like,
Mm,
everything, like different services. I was like, "This is for the cleaning contracts," and they were like, "Oh yeah, it's a
yeah.
standard spec." And I was like, "So are you actually cleaning the upstairs windows?" So you are.
Yeah. But that
Mm,
definitely leads to a better relationship,
it does.
communication, and the end goal of, like, achieving this type of work or whatever you're doing is is just easier to achieve than just going through, oh, but you didn't say that, oh, but you didn't say that. And there are so many bodies involved in, property
And
managers,
if you
leaseholders,
make it clear
contractors,
that
like
everyone can communicate in that open, that open way and be just honest with each
yeah.
other, and that, maybe we'll do what we can, but
Mm,
we can't always, we're not
mm,
always going to say yes. We're not just yes people, but we'll always look into things. Then people they start to change their habits over time.
yeah.
And instead of having those like negative conversations, people are like, oh, actually, apologies, I didn't mention this.
Mm,
Instead of batting it back at you as if it's some kind of like, you're playing a game of tennis
yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
I've definitely learned over the years is that it has always been that I want to speak to contractors and starting with leaseholders. I want to speak to leaseholders, and when they ask me questions, I want to be able to answer, right? Because that makes me confident and
Yeah.
I'm like a great property manager. Then I speak to contractors and I'm like, I can answer all the questions. I'm like, I'm not in that trade. Why would I know? so
Yeah.
so being, like not knowing the answers and like coming across as someone that you're not you're not confident
There's
or
a
competent.
line, isn't there? Because you want to come across as competent, but I mean, I suppose it's about working with contractors. At least it's about working with people that you trust, and that's the main thing that you look
Yeah,
for in the contractor. Because actually, you've got to put a lot of trust in them, because you need to be able
absolutely.
to say to them, actually, I don't understand this. Can you explain this to me? Without feeling as though they will take advantage of the fact that they know you don't know.
Definitely,
And we're
definitely.
blessed to have a lot of really great contractors that I've worked with that have
Oh,
literally,
absolutely.
like, since I was like a baby property manager, and they'd speak to me, and I've learned so many things off these people over the years.
Mm,
And like, there's still some contractors I ring now, just to be like, "How are you?" Because I used to
yeah,
speak to you every day, and
yeah.
I don't.
I
Yeah.
still work with few contractors from back in the days from my very, very first block management company that I work for, just because we get along and I trust them, and they're good contractors, so why not? And we often with new blocks we get introduced to Peter, who has been doing the gardening for so long, or
Yeah. He's doing it
Mary
for the
that
last
has
13
been
years.
cleaning the property for 20 years. And it's great to have those, but obviously we're all in cycle, and our end comes at some point, and or we're moving away or abroad or changing careers. So finding people that you can work with and trust, and we're talking about contractors, is really valuable to have. They're our eyes and ears in on site, aren't they? So
Exactly, and they teach you so much. I feel really
yeah,
blessed to have met some of them and have,
yeah,
been
absolutely.
like, I sometimes I look back and think they must have thought I was an idiot when I started, and you ring them and you're just like, "Don't know what's going on, but the fire alarm's going off."
Yeah. And now I also see that a lot of them are they're happy to use the softwares that we work with on the
Yes, they
maintenance
are more
side.
adoptive of technologies, and I think you still get
Yeah,
the odd people that aren't,
yeah.
and technologies are also adapting to be able to accommodate those people who don't want to use the software in the way it's intended. So that
Mm,
information can still come from a contractor who comes in with a handwritten note and you have to scan it in. That
yeah,
can still be brought into the system and dealt with in the same way.
yeah.
So technology is adapting to the problems it knows, because we know those problems exist. So, we develop solutions to all of those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I am big advocate of using the softwares and AI, because it's definitely there. The admin side of it's side is definitely reducing our time,
Yeah.
and yeah, like you said, some contractors may not upload their invoice on the software, but yeah, that's fine.
But
One
we
or
can
two.
develop, solutions to everything. And I think that's the main thing with tech,
Mm,
is that, um, you do end up with more support. A lot of tasks can now be automated, but I can't stress the importance of actually working with your tech providers.
Yeah.
Tell them the issues, tell them what you need, because instead of a lot of, people at work will just go, "Oh, this is really annoying. I don't want to use this." But there is probably one thing they could change about the way that they work that would open up, better automation.
Mhm.
And if you speak to a tech provider, they'll probably give you a workaround you don't know about. For example,
Yeah.
contractor who doesn't want to upload their invoice to the portal, you can get them, there are other ways. And if there isn't a workaround, then demand creates
Mm.
solutions. So good tech providers will always evolve with
Yeah.
their customers' requirements.
Mm. But little tutorials, like just to give us, because obviously we, the property managers, I don't think we use the full, ability of like what a software can do, just because we kind of get set on the day to day, and we don't have a time to explore. And sometimes you have like a pop up of like, oh, read this or watch
Mm.
this. So little videos of like, a few minutes just to show how
Just
to.
to be able to check
Um,
something, or yeah,
yeah.
I know what you mean. And I think we're having more with the, you know, property management
Mhm.
platforms, there
Yeah.
are more, AI bots that you can ask questions of, live chat options within the
Yes.
platform that you can ask, on the spot and just say, "Excuse me, I need some help."
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is very good. But yeah, I think tech overall, um, it is helping property managers. It just has to be adopted. And yeah, obviously I work for Dwellant, so people always think I'm just talking about Dwellant because I work there. However, the reason that I work for Dwellant is because I worked for several different managing agents. I used Dwellant in between.
Mhm.
And the first managing agent and the last managing agent that I worked for didn't
Okay.
use Dwellant, but didn't have that kind of front end technology system that is doing the same kind of thing. So not just Dwellant, but they didn't have that kind of support in place. And it did make my job a lot more difficult. And once you've had that support for years and years, you look
Yeah.
at it and go, I feel a bit like I've gone back in time and I'm being limited.
Yeah.
And that's why, when a job came up at Dwellant, I was like, actually, my friend
Yeah.
recommended me. He said, "You're really good with Dwellant." And I was like, well,
Mm.
actually, that would make sense
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
especially with me having brought this up in my job recently.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's a very good transition from PM to. I know a couple of people that did the opposite.
mm.
So I'm not sure. I think your way is better.
I
Oh.
get told all the time though, I find it interesting because people go, "Oh, you've
Yeah.
left the industry at the right
Yeah.
time." And I'm like, one, I haven't really left the industry. I still want to work with the industry. But two, um, that wasn't the reason. That I didn't run away from
Mm.
property management. And I think
Yeah.
if you're going to work with something else in the industry, so whether it's recruitment or whether
Yeah.
it's tech, you still got to have the passion for what you did,
Mhm.
um, to push you forward with what you're doing. Otherwise, I mean, I don't think I'd want to walk around talking about a property management system if I hadn't thought that it helped me or had those problems in my job.
Yeah.
You've got to stay passionate and up to date with what you
Mm.
were working with.
Yeah, but you also speak to a lot of property managers. So obviously, you
Yes,
understand if there is anything that has changed from the time when you were a property manager. You kind of work together, and that's what you guys need. You need to work with property managers to understand what's needed,
that's
because
it.
softwares are complex and they take a lot of time to build, and they're very costly as well. So the information is vital. The training of the system.
We see the same problems, I think, over and over again with different. A lot of it is to do with obviously staff turnover as well. So you train people properly, they start using it correctly. People leave a business, they come back in, and the new staff haven't been trained, so it all just gets lost. And
Yeah.
then we'll suddenly have somebody. I had somebody message me the other day,
Mm.
and they said, actually, we're using Dwellant, but we don't use it for this, and we don't use it
Yeah.
for this, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure why.
Mm.
And we could do with some training. Is that something you offer? And I was like, well, of course we offer training, but like, just
Yeah.
approach us and ask. Yeah. So
Yeah, and there will be
yeah,
more and more softwares coming in. So obviously it is something that you have to make sure you keep on top.
It's another thing for property managers to think of and and have to, have to stay up to date with. And I think that's what people struggle with adopting it is they
Yeah,
go,
yeah,
actually, I have to learn all these new regulations and this and this and this. And now you want me to learn how to use this system, put
yeah.
time into that. Yeah.
I know. There is a lot. There is a lot
Mm.
that I don't think my day has been 9 to 5 in a very long time, maybe the last 6 years, but hey. Lizzie, what advice would you give to someone starting in the industry
um, Ask questions,
as a
like I said.
property manager? Yeah.
Yeah. Don't ever stop asking questions. Learn the law. Um, that you'll always be learning. So never feel discouraged that you don't know things or you don't know everything because you will never know.
Yeah.
Not to take things personally,
Oh,
treat it
that's a
like a
big one.
business. Yeah, treat it like a business because otherwise you'll cry all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And to get qualified, I think don't just rely on the people around you to teach you everything. It's great that people teach you things. As we've said, it's great that you speak to contractors, you learn so much on the job, but get the qualifications that you need because
Mhm.
it will, I mean, ultimately, it will be more regulated anyway. At some point, we will need to
Yeah.
have those qualifications,
Mm.
but that will give you a framework to work with if you're new into the industry. Go and do your
Yeah.
affiliate TPI qualification, and carry on. And I think that's really important because when I started out, I think I was pushed into my affiliate in my second year as a PA.
Oh,
And then
yep.
it took me years and years to sit down again and for an employer to say, yeah, do your associate. But if somebody had said to me, "You make sure you get these qualifications," in my first few weeks, I'd have been like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I need to focus on that." And another thing, I think, find your strengths because you're gonna feel like you have to be good at everything. But maybe your strength is in communicating and
Yeah.
building relationships. Maybe it's technical knowledge about the
Mhm.
building that you're interested in. Maybe it's interpreting leases, maybe you're a numbers person. So find out what you're interested in and run with it because what makes for passionate people in the industry is that they're interested and they care about what they're doing. So having a niche that you actually, you really get and you're really interested in, and that can
Yeah.
grow with experience. But if
Absolutely.
you know, find that strength and try and find it early on and then nurture it.
Totally, because then it could lead to a burnout, a lot of stress. What am I doing? And all these questions that, can obviously lead to leaving the industry for many reasons that, communication with whoever you work with or anyone in the industry. There's so many people out there now that anyone can reach out to. We are all posting things on LinkedIn, going into all these amazing events and meeting up. And there is always someone that can hold your hand in difficult times.
That's it. I
100%.
think the industry is actually in a really positive place where, I mean, it's becoming more common that people send their actual, their property management teams to networking events. It's not just people who are higher up in a business that attend, it's their
Yeah.
staff. And it allows people to learn and grow.
Mhm.
And I think traditionally people didn't want to let people up to network because they'll meet other employers and maybe they'll
Yeah.
be poached. And
Yeah.
but actually, the way for someone
Correct.
to grow and become passionate about the industry is to
Yeah.
attend all those things and to hear the wider context of what they're doing, because it's great you just manage your own portfolio and I never had any wider industry context for years and years.
Same.
And actually,
Yeah.
as a working in PropTech and going to different events, I have learned more about the wider industry than I ever did as a property manager. And it actually makes me think,
Yeah.
had I known this, then I would have worked in a different way. And there's so many things you look at everything with hindsight. So,
Yeah. Although I remember meeting you when you won the Property Manager of the Year at the Dwellant 2 years ago.
yes.
And I
Oh,
think I got the a new business. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, Joyanne. I can't
I
remember.
can't remember what it was.
Yeah, new business,
Oh,
but yeah,
that was such a highlight of
yeah,
my, like, at the end of my career as well, to receive an award was
yeah.
obviously, it was like a
You were
final
very
stamp on
happy.
it.
You seem genuinely very happy. Although
Yeah,
you're saying, "I won an award, but I'm leaving property man I'm leaving being a property manager." So that was good.
I'm going off on a
Any
tangent.
yeah, any closing thoughts, for property managers, directors, leaseholders overall in terms of building up a great relationship between ourselves and moving forward, managing great buildings that we have across UK?
I think whether you're managing a building or whether you're living in one,
Mm,
knowledge is your greatest asset, and the more everyone understands how leasehold works and where it doesn't, the more we can work together to solve problems. And I think this is why, platforms
yeah,
like this are great, because we're sharing issues and people can hear our perspectives on
yeah,
it. And leaseholders understanding that property managers don't think the system is perfect either. And there are lots of frustrations that we have. It's about working with each other for the better good. And I think organisations like, for example, the TPI have
yeah,
been really instrumental in driving the change that we
absolutely.
need to see in this industry, and changes on the way, and the way that we work is continuing to, evolve with higher standards and expectations. So it's easy to see that as pressure, but I think it's important that everybody sees the bigger picture too, and how,
Yeah,
how positive this is.
absolutely. Thank you very much, Lizzie. It's been
Thank you.
great speaking to you, and I will see you soon.